Welcome to our video series on the prevention of hate speech and disinformation.
Hello, I'm Dominique Fraser, a research associate at the Asia Society Policy Institute. The recent COVID-19 pandemic led to what UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres termed a tsunami of hate and xenophobia, scapegoating and scaremongering. In this video, we'll talk a little bit about the rise of hate speech during the pandemic in Malaysia and Indonesia. And we also share some tools that were created both by the United Nations and individual governments to combat false information and hate speech in that time. As the world started to receive stay-at-home orders at the beginning of 2020, the world moved online. And with it, the rise of hate speech and disinformation increased as well. The COVID pandemic was the first pandemic that was also an infodemic, or, as the UN called it, a disinfodemic. An infodemic is when there's so much information that it's difficult to distinguish between official, authoritative information and wrong information that has either accidentally or deliberately been created to be wrong. A lot of misinformation was shared during the pandemic, which is accidentally wrong information, but also disinformation, which is information that's deliberately misleading. And then there were instances of malinformation, which is information, usually online, that is deliberately created to cause harm. False information can amplify hate speech by polarizing the public debate on certain topics, including COVID-19. Hate speech, in turn, heightens the risk of conflict, violence, and human rights violations. And disinformation can have an impact on health outcomes. In Southeast Asia, for example, wrong information on COVID-19 led to vaccine hesitancy in a lot of cases. During times of crises, disinformation and violence against marginalized communities often increase. When the pandemic first broke out, discrimination and hate speech were largely targeted against those of Chinese and East Asian appearance and heritage. As time passed and the crisis dragged on, hate speech began to target those who are traditionally discriminated against. In Malaysia, the targets of hate speech in January and February 2020 were largely ethnic Chinese people. From mid-March, following a large outbreak at a religious gathering, the targets became Malay Muslims. Once the adverse health impacts of that large outbreak subsided, the targets became Rohingya refugees and other migrant communities. Worryingly, online hate speech included the use of dehumanizing language, such as comparisons to dogs and parasites, which research has long shown lowers the threshold for physical violence. And indeed, in Malaysia, online hate speech, in a lot of cases, spilled out into the physical world, and there are reports of a marked increase of targeted violence against the Rohingya community. In Indonesia, as in many parts of the world, the initial targets of discrimination hate speech were Chinese and ethnic Chinese communities. In Indonesia, the targets remained the ethnic Chinese population. That's because the traditionally discriminated against community are the ethnic Chinese. In the past, discrimination has led to violence, particularly in the 1960s and in 1998. In 2020, during the pandemic, thankfully, hate speech largely stayed online and didn't spill over into the physical world. Partly in response to hate speech and rapidly spreading false information, many countries, including in Southeast Asia, used their existing laws, updated them, or even created new laws to combat fake news. However, critics of events in Cambodia, Thailand, and the Philippines, among other places, questioned whether governments were really trying to fight disinformation and hate speech, or rather silencing their critics. Thankfully, most emergency decrees in the region have now been lifted, but of course, these have left a worrying precedent for what might happen during a different crisis in the future. The UN also reacted to increased hate speech and discrimination online and released a specific guidance note on addressing and countering COVID-19 related hate speech. The note notes that the primary responsibility to tackle hate speech lies with national governments. Among other recommendations, it noted that legal responses to hate speech must be carefully balanced with the right to freedom of opinion and expression and the right of access to information. The guidance note also included recommendations for social media companies, including the need to take into consideration the social and political context, to work directly with affected communities, and to avoid an over-reliance on artificial intelligence or AI when it comes to content moderation. A combination of hate speech and false information fueled discrimination against minorities during the pandemic. As the region now attempts to live with the virus, it must ensure that it tackles flare-ups of online hatred while ensuring respect for freedom of expression, both online and offline.